Okay, it is time to get started, and we will do just that. Good to see everybody. Got a couple of announcements to make. We've got some questions that goes along with our study today. I think everybody's got a copy of it. If not, I think Brittany's passing them out. Couple of announcements. The Hillbridge congregation at Dublin is going to have a Ladies' Day on Saturday, October the 8th, from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock. And the registration will be from 9 to 9:45. So, ladies, this will be posted out there, and you get a chance to attend that. I'm sure they would appreciate it, and you'll probably enjoy it and get something out of it. There will be a meeting starting today at Dublin with Jerry Martin as a speaker, and this will run through Wednesday. And so if you get a chance to go over there for that, I'm sure they'll appreciate it. I will probably go either tomorrow night or Tuesday night, one or the other. But it should be a good effort on their part there. Sick list, won't go over everybody. It looks about the same. I don't see any new additions. Remember Trish Osmond, as she continues her treatments and getting information, whatever needs to be done to get her squared away, and hopefully she's making some good progress there. Martha's still with us and doing pretty good. That's good to see. Debbie Smith, she's still doing okay, Daniel, better? So that's good. So that's because she was real sick the other day. That's good news. Crystal's recovering from her surgery and seems to be doing pretty good. Others on the list there are different ones. Remember these various folks. Okay, as we get ready to get started for our class, I'm going to ask Joe, if he would, to lead us in a word of prayer as we start our class.
Father, we pray for this country and our president as he guides this great country. Give him wisdom in the decisions that he makes, especially during these troubled times when there's such conflict and so much hate in this country. Father, we pray for us, each and every one of us, as we begin this hour of study and this hour of worship service. Help us to concentrate on what is being said and done here this morning so that we can all learn something that's going to be of benefit to us as Christians. These things we pray in Christ's name.
Thank you. I was having some problems with my printer, and certainly beyond my capabilities of fixing it. And finally, I just give up and called Quality Computers. You know, I pay that little $12.99 a month for their support staff, which has paid for itself a couple times over and over. So I called them, and took them 56 minutes to figure out the printer. And so I guess I'd mashed enough buttons, I got it all out of whack. But anyway, it's working again. But I see it don't necessarily know how to spell. We've got to work on that. Y'all pointed out the word heard in that first sentence, but how about the very top line, providences? The S don't need to be there, but it's okay, it is there. So anyway, spelling was not one of the qualities of that particular computer. And we all know that, probably in the word in providences, I probably put the S there. But sometimes the computers do change your words. They don't print out what you put in there sometimes. And I run into that on a number of occasions. But anyway, we're going to be looking today at continue our study in providence. And whenever we think of providence, it is a vital part of our life. I don't know that we always recognize it. Last week we began our study on providence, and we asked what it was, and we had some good answers and good discussion about that. Certainly providence is a part of our life, and probably more than we realize. And we'll maybe look at some examples of some of that today, perhaps. And, last week we talked about the fact that God keeps his promises. This material is coming from a book written by Cecil May Jr., and I had seen where it was had some good reviews on it, and so I ordered a copy of it. And it's a good book, and it goes into Providence in some pretty good detail. Well, chapter 2 of the book is entitled Providence is Perhaps. And we've got this study sheet. I'm not sure if everybody's got that or not. Did they get one when they came in? Okay. Have you ever heard the expression someone say, I will see you Sunday unless providentially hindered? Or expressions such as that or similar to that? Probably have. You more than likely have. Well, what does that mean? I will see you Sunday unless I'm providentially hindered.
If it's God's will, I'll be somewhere else. If it's God's will, I'll be there. I mean, wherever you want.
Okay?
If nothing happens.
If nothing happens, that's generally the concept that we look at. If nothing happens, I'll be there. And that's the general meaning behind that statement. But let's look at that statement for a little bit. Conditions, things do happen, as we all know. If the creek don't rise, yeah. Things do happen sometimes. And things can happen that certainly can prevent us from being here at all or on time. Sometimes these are things beyond our control. What was it, Jake, here a few weeks back? For the 5:30 kids class for the session with the kids, you were going to be here, but traffic or something held you up that afternoon. Stuff like that you can't control. That happens. And so, things do sometimes take place. But when we consider this statement that is made, some have the idea and would reject this statement, I will see you Sunday unless providentially hindered. Some people would reject that statement based on their assumption, and we're going to look at this a little bit later, based on their assumption that, God would not hinder you from attending services. And some would use that as their argument to say, well, this is not a true statement. And we can kind of understand somewhat the concept where they're coming from. But as we get later into our discussion this morning, we're going to look at that a little bit closer. And, things do happen that hinder us. And we all know that. We live in Byron. Sometimes the traffic is backed up on the interstate. You may have a flat tire coming in. Your car may break down. It can be any number of things. That happens that's beyond our control. Well, was Paul ever hindered in doing the things that he planned to do? He was, wasn't he? Things do happen that sometimes hinder us. Well, let's notice Romans 15 and verse 22. Romans 15:22. In Romans 15:22, one more page here. He says, for which cause also I have been much hindered from coming to you. Now, what is the concept behind that? I've been much hindered from coming to you. Paul was sometimes hindered from doing the things that he had planned to do. And, You know, there was things that he had anticipated, things that he was planning on, but you know, for whatever the reasons, he was not always able to do that. You know, but let's back up in Romans 15 a little bit. Let's back up, just say through verse 19. We'll start right there. Through mighty signs and wonders by the power of the Spirit of God, so that from Jerusalem and round about unto whatever that word is, Illyricum, I have fully preached the gospel of Christ. Yea, so have I strived to preach the gospel, not where Christ was named, lest I should build upon another man's foundation. But as it is written, to whom he was not spoken of, they shall see, and that they have not heard shall understand. Then he said, for which cause also I have been much hindered from coming to you. So, for which cause? In verse 22, looking back to the previous verses, he says, because of these situations, I have been hindered from coming to you. Now, when we consider Paul being hindered, why was he hindered? What was it that hindered him from going to them?
Preaching the gospel other places.
He was at other places preaching the gospel. That's exactly right. Why was he at other places? Because he was preaching the gospel, of course. But he being at other places preaching the gospel, who told him to go there?
Spirit of God.
Okay, the Spirit of God. Was he an individual that could make choices? He wasn't he? And not saying that these are places he shouldn't have gone, certainly not saying that. But these places he went to, he saw a need, he saw the significance, saw the importance of being there, and he went to these various places. And as a result of that, not saying that it wasn't a good thing, because it was, but as a result of that, it hindered him from being where he had planned to be. So the point of what I'm saying here is, do we, you and I, do we sometimes make decisions that hinder us from doing what we had originally planned to do? We do, don't we?
For Paul.
True, absolutely, and not saying anything wrong with that. Absolutely not.
These places have never been taught Jesus.
That's right.
And he was writing to the church.
Mm-hmm. And he probably made a good choice. Not questioning the choice that he made, because it was a good choice. They needed the gospel, and that's where he went. Good job. But as a result of that, he didn't go where he had planned to go. Not that it was a bad thing, but by the choices he made, it hindered him from doing what he was planning to do. Which he done probably what was right, no question on that. But it hindered him from doing what his plans were. We may do that. We may make plans that I'm going to do a certain thing, and something may come up, using the word Jimmy just used, and it's the correct word, a higher priority of more significance, more importance that we take care of, and that prevents us from going to where we were going to go and do whatever we were going to do. Not necessarily anything wrong with that either. Sometimes priorities take place, of course. And so, that would be the case here with Paul. But it prevented him from doing what he had planned to do. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But also, let's look at another situation with Paul. In Titus, not Titus, but 1 Thessalonians rather. In 1 Thessalonians 2 and verse 18. 1 Thessalonians 2 and verse 18. Wherefore we would have come unto you, even I, Paul, once and again, but Satan hindered us. Now, we saw in that first illustration that we just read that he was hindered from going where he was planning to go because of decisions he made. And he made the right choices and right decisions. But here we see that he is hindered because of Satan. Satan hindered him. Does Satan sometimes hinder us? Very well might. What would be some ways in which Satan might hinder us? Coming to church, absolutely. Doing good deeds. Putting stumbling blocks before us. You know, Satan has a way of attacking us. He knows our weak points. He knows how to get to us, if you will. And so there are things that Satan might very well do to hinder us. And so that's another factor here. And that's what Paul is saying in 1 Thessalonians 2 and verse 18. Satan hindered him. So, so when Paul was hindered from doing something that he had planned to do, in the first case we looked at, he was hindered by his personal choice. And not saying he made a bad choice. But by personal choice, he was hindered from doing what he planned to do. And in the second case we just looked at, he was hindered by Satan. Things do happen. Notice Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 11. Ecclesiastes 9:11. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happens to them all. Time and chance happens to them all. Things happen. We're talking about a while ago. Things beyond our control. Time and chance. You're going down the interstate, you come upon an accident that's happened, you may be sitting in traffic 30, 40 minutes. You may have a flat tire. Something could happen. Things beyond your control that you have nothing to do with. This kind of stuff does happen. We all know that. And, have you ever, we give the illustration a while ago of Jake on that a couple weeks back on a Sunday evening, wasn't able to be here because of traffic. Have you ever had a circumstance to come up, unplanned, none of your doing, that prevented you from being able to attend services? You may have. Things do sometimes happen. And it's kind of what he's talking about in Ecclesiastes. Things happen sometimes. Things beyond our control. And so factors enter in. But then let's notice what James says in James 4, 13 through 16. In James 4, 13 through 16. Go to now, ye that say, today or tomorrow we will go to such a city and continue there a year, buy and sell and get gain. Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanisheth away. For ye ought to say, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. But now ye rejoice in your boastings. All such rejoicing is vain. Well, consider what he's saying here. What's the key words in this text that we just read from James? Lord willing, if the Lord wills. And that's a phrase that really carries with it more than just a speaking of words. Is it the Lord's will that I do this or that, whatever it may be? Not just in attending services, but in anything we do in life. Is it the Lord's will? And we should have that attitude, is it the Lord's will? Considering that, I announced a while ago that Dublin is having their gospel meeting starting today. And my plans are to either go either tomorrow night or Tuesday night, whichever night, maybe even both nights, I haven't decided yet. But, I'm planning to go at least one night to Dublin to their meeting. But, something might happen. Some unforeseen tragedy or anything could happen. My time on this earth might be up before I go. We could have an accident and be injured or something. Anything can and does happen. That being said, let's say that, and I'm going to make up an illustration, let's pray it don't happen, but let's say that we're on our way and we're going down I-16. They have a lot of wrecks on I-16. And one of these wild drivers hits us. And we're in the hospital. And we're not able to attend the meeting. What caused us, in that illustration, what would it be that caused us not to be able to attend that meeting?
Something you didn't plan.
Something we did not plan. That's exactly right. Well, Lord willing, we're going to go either tomorrow night or Tuesday night or both nights, whichever. But something could happen that we don't plan. We understand the concept of that. Something could happen that we don't plan. If that were to happen, then is it God's will, is it the Lord's will that we attend that meeting tomorrow night or Tuesday night? If something were to happen that we did not plan and that prevented us from going. We didn't know. We just said if the Lord wills, we're going to go. But something happens to keep us from going. Something we don't plan, an accident or whatever. Is it the Lord's will that we not go?
You got to be really careful.
Okay.
By saying it to the Lord's will, because we don't know the mind of God at all.
Very, very true. And you're on the right track where I'm trying to go here. We don't know what God's plans are for us. You're exactly right. It may be, and who am I to say, of course, it may be that for whatever the reason, it was not God's plan for me to go. Can't explain that, don't know to understand that. As Anthony just said, and he's correct, we don't know the mind of God. God may have another plan, something else. And consider, something happens to prevent us from going. Is that a sign of providence? Very well might be. God had a different plan. We don't always understand that. God had a different idea. I'd rather you do this or whatever the situation might be. Remembering that God is in control. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have the attitude, if it's the Lord's will, I'll do this or I'll do that, because we should. We should always, and whatever it is we're doing, strive to do the Lord's will. That should be a priority for us, to do the Lord's will. That should be important to us. But God is in control, and, we need to realize that. Now, we certainly don't want to plan future events. And I just use the illustration of going to Dublin. It could be other things in our life. It might be family planning. It might be professional related for our jobs or whatever. It could be any concept of life. It could be our children on their education or whatever the scenario may be. As we plan with the idea if it's the Lord's will. And think about that. How do we determine if something is the Lord's will or not? If it's the Lord's will, I'll do this or do that. But how do we know? How do we determine that?
Look at the scriptures
Okay.
and determine what we need to be doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. From the scripture, and you're exactly right. From the scriptures, whatever it is I'm planning to do, whatever it may be in any aspect of life, is this something that is proved by God? Because if it's not, then it's not the Lord's will that we do it. So whatever it is that we may be planning to do, is this something that's going to be acceptable in the sight of God? Pray about it. Take it to God in prayer. And always with that attitude, if the Lord's will. But we also need to know what the Lord's will is. And Anthony, you nailed it. Here's our answer to what the Lord's will is. Go to the scriptures. What's the Lord's will regarding whatever it may be? Is that situation, that project, whatever it is that something God would be pleased with? Would Christ do this? Yeah, Ginger.
For instance, services. Everybody knows we have services on Sunday, but they'll say, well, I don't know what's coming up yet. Back when Mama was alive, they would get out, instead of the children were trying to make plans or whatever. She said, well, I don't know what happened next. I've got them coming up. I said, well, I'm asking you now. And she'll joke, and I said, are you waiting a better offer? And it's like, there are things that we know, like the services, that you know in the plan, that something come up 3 years later, and you'll go to that instead.
Mm-hmm. Very true.
You talk about, well, you already walk on the calendar, you could do Sundays and that, you could do Wednesdays. But you're not always probably to remember.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. And you bring up a valid point. Sometimes we may use that concept, we may not use the word providentially, but I was hindered, which in many respects goes back to the first example that we looked at. You made a choice. And maybe you didn't make the right choice. Maybe you made a bad choice. You put that entertainment or whatever it was before God. You made a bad choice. But people will do that sometimes. Well, I couldn't attend because this came up. And sometimes, depending on the circumstances, it may be that that's something you need to take care of. For example, we'll use Anthony and Miss Linda here as an example here. If here it is, it's Sunday morning, it's the Lord's Day, they're planning to be here like they always are, but Anthony gets sick. He needs some attention. He needs someone to help him because of a medical condition. So what's Miss Linda going to do? Sorry, buddy, you on, I got to go. Well, maybe she would, maybe not, I doubt it. No, she's going to take care of Anthony, and she should. And he would do the same with her, of course. Things do happen. Yeah, yeah. You know, what was it here a year ago now? Time goes by so fast, maybe not even that long. Many of you will remember. Sitting right here, time for the Lord's table. That's before the pandemic, wasn't it? So it's been longer than that. It's been 2 years. Wow, where time goes. So it's been 2 years sitting right here, and whoever was presiding over the table, and you know, and I'm getting hot. I mean, I'm hot. You know, start taking my coat off, and thank goodness we had a box of Kleenex here, because I got sick. And many of you remember that right here. Debbie and Jimmy was sitting over here, and Debbie got Reggie. Hey, Doc. Well, I wasn't an X-ray, but anyway, got Reggie came over and took me out. Well, guess what? I didn't speak that morning. Now, I was planning on coming back in here. Reggie said, no, go home. Jimmy says, no, go home. And I'm going to drive home. Joe says, you ain't driving. Let Ginger drive. I thought I better take my chances. But anyway, you know. Yeah. Well, going down 75, Ginger's in the left lane going about 90. No, she's doing the speed limit. But she's in the left lane, and guess what? I got sick again. And, you know, it's going out the window. I mean, seriously. That's one of those circumstances you can't control. It happens. That is a case of being providentially hindered. You cannot control it. It happens. And sometimes we make good choices. Sometimes we may make bad choices. But we're accountable for whatever choice is that we make. And sometimes it's made for you. That's very true. That's exactly right. But notice, if you will, in Proverbs 16:9. Proverbs 16:9. A man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directs his steps. Powerful statement. We make our plans. We devise whatever way we're going to do, whatever we're going to do. We plan for this, we plan for that. But the Lord directs our steps. And that's certainly a very, very powerful statement. And then in Proverbs 19:21. Proverbs 19:21. There are many devices in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the counsel of the Lord that shall stand. You know, God is in control. It's not us. And we sometimes don't recognize that as people. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that regardless. That's our attitude many times. We forget that God is in control. And then we look at Proverbs 27:1. Proverbs 27:1. Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. That kind of goes along with James 4. You know, don't talk about tomorrow, what you're going to do tomorrow, because we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. We may or may not do the things that we're planning on. And probably to everyone in here, we could ask, well, what's your plans for tomorrow? And we all got different plans. And we may or may not fulfill those plans. Some of it may be by choices we make. Some of it may be things that beyond our control that stops us from doing it. We don't know. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. And so, you know, realize the magnitude of what we're thinking. Does God have a different plan for us? does God's providence enter in. You know, we think about it. Providence doesn't just hinder us from doing something. It could. But providence plays another aspect into our lives. Certain things may happen that we don't foresee that could very well be for our good. God is in control. You know, I've used the illustration before about Dr. Haid in Atlanta. Now, I had no idea I was going to see him that day. But that was a blessing. And it wasn't coincidence or accident that we ran across each other. You know, he saw my x-ray. He searched for me. God was in control. I think that's a prime example of providence. And each one of us could probably look back in our lives and see providence at work, where God provided certain things, or God prevented certain things. For example, maybe just the other day, there in Byron, a week or so ago, some of you saw it on TV, in the metropolis city of Byron. Car was coming down Highway 42 from Crawford County. The lady was driving recklessly, erratically all over the road. Other people saw her. They phoned it in to the law enforcement. She got there at the intersection of 42 and 49. Some of them blocked her in. She hit an individual, hit a police officer, literally the person, hit 3 police cars, made a left, and they took off down 49 into Byron. They finally got her stopped about 2 or 3 blocks down the road. Saying that to say this. Brittany and Ginger, literally, how many seconds would you say you were from where that happened? Less than a minute. 30 seconds, 40, whatever. They were right there. And it didn't affect them. Now, to go in there and say, well, that's providence. That may be stretching it. However, maybe it was providence. Maybe God saw fit for them not to be there at that moment. Because another 30 or 45 seconds, they could have been the one that was hit. I mean, it was that close. So sometimes God, through providence, allows things to happen. And then maybe sometimes through providence, God prevents things from happening. God is in control, and God knows what's best for us, more so than we do. So it's a lot to consider, a lot to think about there. And our time's beginning to run close. We've got a few other verses there. You can look at them on your own and some. We want to talk about Philemon for a second. Let's go to Philemon. Philemon 10. In Philemon, what do we know about Philemon? What do we know about this individual? Who was he? Who was Onesimus? Anybody got Philemon, verse 10?
Yes.
Read that for us.
I appeal to you for my child, Onesimus, whose father I became in my imprisonment.
Okay. Paul met up with him through imprisonment. And then we come down verses 15 and 16. Read those for us.
For this perhaps is why he was parted from you for a while, that you might have him back forever, no longer as a bondservant, but more than a bondservant, as a beloved brother, especially to me, but how much more to you, both in the flesh and in the Lord.
The title of this lesson today is Providence is Perhaps, and it goes into several things. In those last 2 verses Jimmy just read, Perhaps Paul met him. Perhaps they were in prison together. Onesimus was a slave, and Philemon had every right to treat him however he wanted to. But Paul appeals to him on behalf of Onesimus, whom he has now converted, and says, don't treat him as a slave, but treat him as a brother, Perhaps this was God's plan. Perhaps that's why he was away from you for this period of time. Here's an example. Paul was using it, of providence at work. God is in control. Let's never lose sight of that fact, that God is in control. And always pray that God's will be done. And trust that God's will be done, whatever it may be. Good discussion, good comments, and our time is pretty much up, and we will pick up here again next Sunday. Next week it'll be Providence and Free Will. And so a good book, good discussion. We'll pick up there a little later.